Welcome to Tardisian Files, a show dedicated to reviewing and discussing aspects of one of the most loved and longest-running British sci-fi shows. This podcast is a fan-led series where we pull together sources from all across Doctor Who's extended media, including the show itself, comics, audio stories, and novels. In today's episode, we will be discussing an unfinished storyline from the writer Patrick Ness, who, for those of you who don't know, wrote the short-lived Doctor Who spin-off series Class. The storyline that we base our theory on is the Weeping Angel Civil War. We know very little about the circumstances that led to the Weeping Angel Civil War, only that one faction had aligned themselves with the human agency known as the Governors, who had invested in the Coal Hill School, turning it into the Coal Hill Academy, and refurbished the campus with new buildings, including a spatio-temporally transcendent meeting room dubbed M17. This room served as their base of operations and, apparently, their main point of contact with the Weeping Angel faction. The Governor's overall scheme seemed to revolve around the Rhodian Prince Charlie Smith, along with the other teenagers of the Coal Hill Defenders, as well as the time rift that had opened at the school, which we know from the episode Tonight We Might Die was due to the Doctor's frequent visits to the school and surrounding area over the years, which led to a build-up of Artron energy which, by the 12th Doctor's description, had wore the fabric of space-time in the area thin. The Governors worked with the Angels to bring about a potentially apocalyptic event known as the Arrival, which was depicted in their office by a stone tablet which showed a giant weeping angel towering over London. Ultimately, Class was sadly cancelled before we got an answer to what the specific event of the Arrival was. However, it was clear that the Weeping Angels were planning an invasion which did not follow their standard invasion tactics of infiltrating the world by posing as statues and using various methods to attack their victims discreetly. According to Patrick Ness, he had also intended for us to see the Weeping Angels' homeworld, which, given the facts that we've never seen it before, and that these Weeping Angels were operating on Earth as the front line of an invasion force, it's likely that the faction of Weeping Angels that we saw on Class were the ones currently in control of their homeworld. But what were the internal politics of this civil war? Now, Patrick Ness did confirm in his tweet after Class was cancelled that the Weeping Angels were embroiled in a civil war, so we know that one faction was working with the Governors. But what was the other side to this civil war? What were the internal politics like? My theory is that it has something to do with another faction of Weeping Angels that we saw on Doctor Who in the events of Flux, the Weeping Angels of Division. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, Weeping Angels are a race of beings that originated during or just after the end of the Dark Times. There are conflicting accounts as to whether the Weeping Angels originated in one place or another, by some means or another, but for the sake of this theory, I am going to assume that they evolved naturally on their home planet, like most other life forms in the universe. And, for reasons unknown, their environment demanded that they evolve the ultimate defense mechanism. They became quantum locked. This means that in the sight of any living creature, they froze into solid stone. This is why they covered their eyes when travelling in groups, because if they looked to one another, they would freeze permanently. This earned them the nickname Weeping Angels, along with their appearance of being winged humanoids. Weeping angels appear to have been fairly well known in cultures throughout the universe, as they would land on planets under the guise of being normal statues. They would often take over abandoned or discrete locations, and through various methods, they would then lure their victims towards them and wait for them to blink. Once their victim blinked, they would use their temporal powers and touch their victims, sending them often backwards through time and sometimes moving them through space as well. The displacement of the victim would then cause a discharge of potential temporal energy. This energy was the original future of the victim, the life they would have otherwise lived. Now, before the events of Village of the Angels in the series Flux, the Doctor met them on several times in his 5th, 10th, and 11th incarnations. The Weeping Angels showed consistent behaviour throughout their various encounters with the Doctor, up until this point. They always travelled in groups. These groups may have been small, consisting of several angels, such as the small groups that were trapped in the catacombs of the Sistine Chapel in the 16th century, and in Wester Drumlins from the 1960s to 2007, and also in London in 2011. Or the angels had a group that had amounted to a vast army, such as the angels found in 1938 New York and between the 47th and the 50th centuries on the planet Alphaba Metraxis. Additionally, the Weeping Angels would always operate discreetly, and they would always set up bases in abandoned or locations that they could clear out without much or attracting much attention, such as when they set up a base in West Drumlins around 1960, and then they could also establish a quantum farm, such as the way they did with the Winter Quay apartment building in New York in 1938. Or, even if they didn't have a set location, they would still move about discreetly, such as using the street view of CCTV so that they were able to move freely through the virtual version of the street to pursue their victim, like they did in London in 2011 in the short story Touched by an Angel. Also, the Weeping Angels were always after or trying to generate a source of energy. Examples included crashing the Byzantium on the Temple of the Dead to allow the starving angels to feast on the radiation spilling out of the wreckage, sending victims back in time once and unintentionally creating an urban legend to continually lure victims to them, and later steal the TARDIS to feast on the temporal energy within, or establishing a quantum farm, like we said originally with the Winter Quay buildings, a building where they could keep their victims trapped and continuously displace them in time repeatedly until the victim eventually died of old age. And seemingly in contrast to their nature of being adverse to temporal paradoxes, they would tempt their victims sometimes by sending them along their own time stream, hoping that they would change something they regretted, possibly using this to feast on the temporal energy of their original timeline, and in doing so containing the paradox energy, allowing the altered timeline to remain in place. These pre-flux encounters also showed the Weeping Angels to have the following powers at their disposal. The Touch of an Angel. This power is so named because with one touch, Weeping Angels could send their victims back in time. Energy absorption. Weeping Angels could feed on various sources of energy, allowing them to drain electricity from nearby lights and machinery, as well as allowing them to absorb the time energy which they often feasted on, which they generated by temporarily displacing their victims. They also had super speed and super strength, allowing them to both move at impossible distances in the blink of an eye, and allow them to turn magnetised door handles and snap the necks of several humans. Psychic mimicry. This power was accessed by Weeping Angels who killed their victims directly by snapping their necks rather than displacing them in time as they normally would, and they would then very gruesomely get to their victims' brains and strip their cerebral cortices, allowing them to create an impression of the victim's consciousness to communicate with others, namely those that required vocal communication, such as the angel, who was dubbed Angel Bob, created an impression of the cleric Bob, which it had killed, in order to communicate with the 11th Doctor and the remaining clerics. Image manifestation. This power allowed them to possess anything that held their image. Simply put, anything that held the image of an angel became the angel it was depicting. This allowed an angel to move as an image on the screen and manipulate the physical world from the virtual representation on this screen, or the reverse, manifest their physical form in the real world, projecting from the image's medium. This power also allowed them to manifest themselves inside the human brain, as the image formed in their optical cortex or in their subconscious mind like a psychic parasite, allowing them to take over and even kill their host from within. Psychic communication. Although weeping angels couldn't speak, it was clear that they communicated with one another telepathically, based on the way they coordinated themselves. Now, in all of the Doctor's previous encounters with the Doctor, despite their differing tactics, weeping angels still stuck to their core values: infiltrate, establish a base, and use any available energy source to feed whilst they hunted. However, these rules were all established before Village of the Angels. In this episode, we saw a large task force of weeping angels working for Tecteun, targeting a village in 1967, working to recover a rogue member of their ranks, who they pursued across time from 2021. These weeping angels were significantly different from their pre-flux counterparts. First of all, they seemed to merge their bodies into one large asteroid, which they used as a spacecraft, landing in or prior to 1901 and becoming buried. Once the time was right, they emerged from their spacecraft, but still seemed to retain their ability to merge with stone tunnels, forming an entire passageway lined with their claws. While they did displace their victims in time, they would only do this once, and if they touched their victims a second time, the victims would explode into dust, possibly being drained of all of their temporal energy in one go. They also only displaced their victims between 2 points in time: 1901, which is when they originally invaded the village, and 1967. And most strangely of all, they used a new method of entrapment for the villagers and later the Doctor: quantum extraction. Using this method, they either displaced or killed all of the villagers in 1901, and then took the village out of time and space on the same day, creating an endpoint for them to direct their victims from 1967 to when they emerged decades later. They then went into hibernation for 66 years, until re-emerging in 1967, knowing that their rogue agent was there, and proceeded to extract and clear the village again, killing all the villagers after sending them into their extracted version of the village in 1901, leaving behind only Peggy to grow up into Miss Hayward, who would later relive the experience again as an old woman. The reason behind targeting this village, and why they chose 1901 and 1967 specifically, is unknown, other than that by extracting the village at these 2 points, they seem to create a finite time stream to isolate and capture their rogue angel. Ultimately, the angels succeeded in kidnapping their rogue agent, and, as an added bonus, the 13th Doctor, displaying one final new power by turning the Doctor into a winged statue resembling themselves and immobilizing her for transport to the division outpost in the void. So now that we have the background for the two different types of weeping angels and tactics and powers displayed by them, let's get into the theory. Now, my theory is that the division angels were the other faction in this unseen angel civil war. My reasoning is that the division angels only displayed these powers as Tecteun accelerated their evolution and powers in some way, allowing them to perform feats such as quantum extraction, a psychic effort that likely took a lot of power. Now, historically, psychic powers such as image possession were relatively weak, as angels were not able to fully manifest through an image medium, and in the events of touched by an angel, even caused them to disintegrate in the real world, becoming trapped inside their own image medium. However, the Division Angels did not seem bound by this limitation. In fact, they moved extremely freely and very decisively, despite the fact that they were likely expending a lot of power. I believe that when Division recruited their angels, the rest of the Weeping Angels did not agree with serving Division or Tecteun, as this would mean giving up their preferred lifestyle, and thus, this caused a split between the two factions. It's my belief that, as Division aimed to control the universe more, the Wild Angels, as I will call them, took control of their homeworld, and they aimed to go head-to-head with Division so as to relieve them of their control over time and open up new avenues for later incursions. Now, this is just one theory, but it is an example of how two seemingly unrelated stories can surprisingly feed into one another. If you enjoyed this mini-theory, please leave a like and show your friends. You can also leave suggestions for future mini-theories in our social media pages, which we will be expanding in due course. If you enjoyed today's scenario, please leave a like and tell your friends. You can check out some of our other material, either on Spotify or Google Podcasts. You can also follow our Instagram page at Tardisian Files Podcasts for regular updates and news about upcoming content. As always, join us next time on Tardisian Files. See you then, everyone!